Hey, we really need to flip District 1.
Yeah, we do.
But who has the ideas and ability to connect with people from Worcester County to Baltimore County?
I am so glad you asked. Welcome to Dishing with Dan, the podcast for Dan Schwartz for Congress. Each program in Dishing with Dan will be an opportunity to chat about what he will do for District 1 in Congress, why his plans are better for you than Andy Harris's. Dan's campaign is about connecting with folks throughout the district to make sure that his policy platform represents us, which is why he can win this important election. For District 1 listeners, we want to hear from you. You can email your questions to Dan at info@schwartzforcongress.com. And if you send your message as a voice recording, we can include it directly in the podcast. So let's start dishing with Dan. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Hi, Wanda. I'm doing well. Staying very busy on the campaign trail, that's for sure.
Excellent to hear. I'm starting today with a listener question that I'm sure resonates with young people throughout the district about the need to invest in community colleges and trade schools. Let's take a listen.
My question for Dan is regarding college affordability. As of early 2026, student debt totals nearly $2 trillion, with the average loan balance federally being $39,000. It's basically unheard of to get through college without debt. So my question is, do you have any thoughts or plans to help with the affordability of college for District 1 residents?
That's a good question, and I need to have good answer if I want to get the votes of young people who are struggling right now. They're struggling to access the credit that they need to pursue secondary education, and this administration is certainly doing nothing to help there as they mess with the amounts of money that students are able to take out from the federal government for educational purposes, and they've changed professional classifications for folks that want to go into fields like nursing or accounting. They've made it harder to do so, and this puts students in the position where they have to use shady private student lenders, and many of these companies have really bad track records when it comes to working with student borrowers. They charge exorbitant interest rates. They cannot even be relied upon to service these loans appropriately. And at the same time, this administration has shut down the CFPB for the most part, the only agency within our government that had an office that focused on student borrowers. So that's just one part of the problem here, making it less affordable for folks to go to school. Another part of the problem, I think, is that Democrats, my party, we've been so focused on the concept of a 4-year liberal arts education for most kids when that does not need or shouldn't be the only path in which kids can access support to achieve the education that they need. We really need to provide more support as a federal government to our community colleges, to our trade schools, so that folks that do not necessarily want to pursue that 4-year college education can have pathways to affordably access other types of secondary education. Finally, one thing I'll say is we need to find ways to tie student debt relief to folks deciding to work in critical industries that are needed in our communities. For example, if people want to become nurses or nurse practitioners in rural communities, if people want to go into public safety roles or public service, I think that we should have mechanisms that allow for certain amounts of student debt to be forgiven. It's really important that we incentivize folks to work in these fields so that we make sure that our communities have the people necessary to heal us and protect us and to go into the scientific fields that we talked about in last week's episode.
Keeping on the theme of affordability, talk to us about how to make housing more affordable in Maryland. According to data from the National Association of Home Builders, in 2024, the median property value in Maryland's 1st District was $363,600. This seems out of reach for many where the median income is just under $90,000. What could you do in Congress to help Marylanders realize their home ownership goals and build the financial security that comes with owning a home?
Home ownership is very much out of reach for many people that I talk to. And the average age at which people are buying their first home continues to trend up in this country. 20 years ago, it was in the low 30s. Now it is around 50 years old. That is very problematic. And people, connected to the last question, are delaying the purchase of their first home. They're delaying the growing of a family because they're saddled with so much debt from education or from medical expenses. And it's really only getting worse for people as the federal government chips away at resources to help people in need. We need to make sure that we are flexible in the ways in which the federal government looks at how they assist in the home purchase, in the mortgage process. There's a lot of ways in which the federal government touches these things. For example, they set rules under which banks have to kind of write mortgages within a box. Well-intentioned rules that make sure that folks have the ability to repay these loans. But that's resulted in kind of highly formulaic mortgages that so many Americans can simply not fit into. You know, the 20% down standard mortgage that people take out, fixed rate, whether it's the interest rates right now or just the rigidity of these underwriting standards, it's very difficult for people to fit into that box. And something that I learned in my career working for state financial regulators and understanding the difference between these big mega banks and big non-banks like Rocket Mortgage that write most of the mortgages in our country and small community banks, I learned that it's become very difficult for these small community banks to have a role in our local housing markets. We also have seen large private equity come into our local housing markets and purchase housing stock, which raises the costs for everyone. I want to make it easier for our small community banks that do most of the small business lending in this country to also participate in that housing market and to be able to work with individual borrowers, some of whom will be younger people, to understand their individual circumstances and to do the relationship lending that they do best. We should really make sure that we're taking a careful approach here to housing-related policy and regulations that dictate how mortgages are offered to make sure that we're not putting undue regulatory burden on the smallest of our community financial institutions that really do have people's best interest in mind and could work with borrowers to make sure that we're offering responsible credit that allows them to make these big next steps in their lives.
We have now entered April, so we're less than 3 months from the primary. How's the campaign going?
Campaign's going great. I think we're looking at now, with the primary in June not being a very competitive primary, we're really focused on the general election in November. And we're working on generating the institutional support from both here in the district and across the Bay and all over the country that will really help us to continue to get the word out, fundraise. For example, just last week, I was honored to receive our former Congressman Wayne Gilchrist's endorsement. Wayne is somebody that I really look up to, and I'm just glad that he takes my phone calls and sits down for coffee and breakfast with me from time to time. He's really a legend here. He served this district in Congress from 1988 to 2008 for 20 years, and he was a Republican for that whole time. But to just give you a sense of how different our politics are right now, he, as a Republican in Congress, started the Congressional Climate Change Caucus. He also founded something called the Dialogue Caucus, which was focused on talking to other countries, diplomacy, and including to engage in diplomacy with some of our adversaries directly. This was so emblematic of a different type of political dialogue and discourse, and it's the type of politics that I want to bring back. Wayne was the kind of person, didn't matter if there was a R or a D behind your name. He showed up all across this big district. He met with the farmers. He met with the environmentalists. He looked for areas in which they could find agreement, and he really listened to people. That's what I want to do, and it really meant a lot to me to get his endorsement, and I expect to be receiving some other big endorsements in the very near future that I think will be very helpful for us in a number of ways.
That's wonderful news, Dan. Congratulations.
Thank you, Wanda.
That's the program for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you have a question or comment that you'd like us to include in Dishing with Dan, please send your audio file or email to info@schwartzforcongress.com. And please subscribe and share Dishing with Dan with your friends and family. This will help Dan connect with more people throughout the district and strengthen his campaign. It is possible to beat Andy Harris, and Dan Schwartz is the candidate who can do it. We all need to get together, work together to make it happen. This is Wanda Boker, producer and host, signing off for Dishing with Dan.
Thanks, Wanda. See you all next time.